15 men went into a Harlem basement laughing. Only one came back out. No police report, no bodies, no witnesses. Just a rumor that spread faster than fire. They said Bumpy Johnson didn't yell, didn't rush, didn't miss. They said the light kept swinging, the air kept thinning. 3. And one question decided everything. Tonight, you're going to hear what happened under that butcher shop and why Harlem was never the same again. Harlem, late 1940s. The streets above were alive with music and movement, laughter spilling out of bars. Jazz horns crying into the night, heels clicking against wet pavement. But beneath all of that, beneath the rhythm and the lights, there was a basement where time felt frozen. A steel door stood shut under an old butcher shop on Lenox Avenue, and behind it, 15 grown men were screaming like children who finally understood they were out of options. The bulb hanging from the ceiling swung slowly, back and forth, casting warped shadows across concrete walls stained by age and moisture. Every swing revealed another face, pale, terrified, stripped of white robes that had promised power only hours earlier. Sweat soaked their collars. Hands trembled against zip ties biting into flesh. The air was thick, heavy, almost impossible to breathe. Their voices echoed uselessly, swallowed by brick and steel. Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson stood a few steps away, silent. His hat sat low on his head, shadowing his eyes. His suit was clean, pressed, untouched by the chaos around him. He didn't pace. He didn't shout. He simply listened, as if measuring each scream, each plea, each broken breath. To men like these, noise had always been a weapon. Tonight, it meant nothing. One man collapsed to his knees, sobbing. Another slammed his shoulder against the door until his strength gave out. Someone started praying. Someone else started blaming. Fingers pointed in the dark, accusations flying wildly. Desperation tearing away whatever unity they once believed in. The sound was unbearable, until Bumpy lifted his hand. Silence fell instantly. It wasn't forced. It wasn't shouted into existence. It came because they felt it. The weight of him. 3. The certainty that whatever happened next had already been decided by someone else. Bumpy stepped forward just enough for the light to catch his face. His expression was calm, almost bored, like a man waiting for a late train. He looked at them slowly, one by one. 3. Making sure each man understood he had been seen and remembered. Then Bumpy spoke. His voice was low, controlled, unemotional. Which one of you is going to live? The words didn't echo, they sank. Breath stopped. Eyes widened. The meaning settled deep into their bones. This wasn't a threat. This wasn't a bluff. It was a question asked by a man who already knew the answer. 3. And was curious to see who else would figure it out before it was too late. Above them, Harlem kept dancing. Below, 15 men realized the world had forgotten them. The fires didn't come with warnings. No sirens. No gunshots, no shouting in the streets. They came quietly. 3. Slipping into Harlem like a sickness no one saw until it started burning from the inside. The first was a barber shop on the 135th Street, a narrow place that smelled of talcum powder and hot combs. It went up just after 2 in the morning, flames crawling through the windows, while the owner slept upstairs. By the time anyone noticed, the chairs were ash and the mirrors had burst from the heat. 2 nights later, a boarding house burned. Old men lived there, working men, nobody important enough for the newspapers to care. Then a church basement, used for food drives and Sunday lessons, blackened and ruined before dawn. No money taken. No message left that made sense to police. But Harlem didn't need detectives to understand what was happening. On brick walls and alley doors, scratched in chalk or charcoal, the same mark appeared again and again, a crooked cross, careless and hateful. The Ku Klux Klan had come north. They didn't wear hoods in the open. They didn't march down avenues. They hid behind locked doors and whispered meetings, thinking the city would protect them, thinking Harlem was too busy surviving to fight back. They were wrong, but they didn't know it yet. Fear moved faster than fire. People stopped walking alone at night. Store owners slept with one ear open. Mothers pulled children inside earlier, curtains drawn tight, prayers whispered in kitchens long after midnight. Then they found the boy. 17 years old, a shoeshine kid everyone knew, found behind a tenement, barely breathing, face swollen, ribs cracked. Someone had tried to wash the blood away, but it clung to the pavement like it refused to leave. Above him, carved into the brick with something sharp, was the same crooked cross. That was the moment the city went quiet in a different way. Not fear, expectation. Bumpy Johnson heard about it before sunrise. He didn't say much, didn't ask questions. He stared out a window for a long time, jaw tight, hands still. This wasn't business. This wasn't territory or money. This was an insult and worse. It was a message meant to scare Harlem into remembering its place. Bumpy had spent his whole life making sure Harlem never forgot who stood between it and the dark. That same day, he started making calls. Not loud calls. Careful ones. To men on the docks who saw everything come in. To drivers who knew every back street. To Italians who owed him favors they prayed he'd never collect. Names came back. Whispers became patterns. By the second night, Bumpy had an address. An old butcher shop on Lenox Avenue. Closed early, quiet too often. Whatever was burning Harlem wasn't a mystery anymore. And Bumpy Johnson was done watching it spread. Thursday night came with rain, the kind that washed the streets clean and made every shadow deeper. Water ran along the gutters of Lenox Avenue, blurring reflections of streetlights and hiding the sound of footsteps. The butcher shop looked dead from the outside, its windows dark, its sign cracked and hanging at an angle. Anyone passing by would have thought it abandoned. That's exactly why the men inside felt safe. Down in the basement, 15 voices blended together in low laughter and careless talk. Whiskey bottles clinked. Chairs scraped concrete. They spoke freely. convinced they were invisible up here in Harlem. Convinced the city didn't see them and wouldn't dare touch them even if it did. Jokes were made. Slurs were thrown around like they had no weight. 3. Plans were discussed with the confidence of men who believed fear only traveled in one direction. They never heard the back door open. The rain covered the sound of the lock sliding into place. It hid the soft shuffle of shoes on concrete. The controlled breathing of men who had done this kind of work before. The first thing they noticed wasn't the guns or the faces, it was the lights. One moment the basement glowed yellow, the next it flickered, then dimmed, as if the room itself had just taken a nervous breath. Then came the sound that stopped every conversation cold. A shotgun being racked. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The metal click sliced through the room sharper than a scream. Bottles dropped. One man laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke, until he saw the black circle of the barrel pointed his way. Another tried to stand and was slammed back into his chair before his legs fully straightened. Nobody announced anything. Nobody explained. Hands were grabbed. Arms twisted. Zip ties snapped tight around wrists, cutting off circulation. The men who had been so bold moments earlier were suddenly reduced to silence, eyes darting, mouths open but empty of words. They were pushed, dragged, forced off balance, marched deeper into the basement away from the stairs they'd come down laughing. The steel door slammed shut behind them with a final, echoing clang. That was when panic truly set in. One man started shouting for help, pounding on the door until his knuckles split. Another dropped to his knees, pleading to anyone who would listen. Chairs tipped over. Someone tried to run and tripped over his own feet. 3. The basement that had felt safe an hour earlier now felt smaller, tighter, like it was closing in on them. Then the noise stopped again. A figure stepped into the light. Calm, unhurried, hat pulled low. Sweet, untouched by the chaos. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson didn't rush to the center of the room. He didn't raise his voice or flash his weapon. He simply stood there, letting them see him. Letting the truth settle into their chests. They understood then. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't a warning. This was a trap. And it had already closed. The light above them swayed slowly, its wire creaking with every movement, stretching shadows across the basement walls like long, twisted fingers. Chains lay coiled on the floor, unmoving but heavy with promise. The air smelled of damp concrete, sweat, and fear so thick it felt like it could be touched. 15 men knelt or sat where they'd been forced. 53. Shoulders hunched, eyes darting anywhere except toward the man who now controlled the room. Bumpy Johnson didn't rush them. He let the silence settle deep. 3. The kind that crawled into the chest and made every breath feel loud and exposed. He walked behind them slowly, footsteps measured, unhurried. Each step echoed just enough to remind them he was there, watching. Some men clenched their fists until their knuckles went white. Others shook uncontrollably. 3. One whispered prayers under his breath, words tumbling over each other too fast to mean anything. Bumpy stopped near a scarred wooden table and placed a metal case on it. The sound of it touching the surface made several men flinch. He opened it carefully and removed photographs, one by one, laying them out like cards in a losing hand. Burned buildings, blackened doorways, a church basement reduced to ash. Then the last photo. A young boy lying in an alley, face swollen, eyes barely open, blood dark against the pavement. The room seemed to shrink when they saw it. Bumpy finally spoke. 3 churches, he said calmly. 1 boy left to die. No apologies. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It didn't shake. It didn't rise with anger. That made it worse. He turned and faced them fully now, eyes cold, unreadable. He studied them as if they were objects, not men, weighing something invisible. I don't need 15 explanations, he continued. I don't need your reasons. He paused, letting the words sink in. I need 1 survivor. The room exploded. Men shouted over each other, pointing fingers wildly. It was him. I didn't light anything. He planned it. One man broke down completely, sobbing, rocking back and forth. Another tried to crawl away, chains scraping loudly across the floor. Promises poured out, money, names, anything they thought might buy mercy. The noise became desperate, animal, uncontrollable. Bumpy raised 1 finger. Silence snapped back instantly. He scanned their faces again, ignoring the loudest voices, the strongest men, the ones still pretending they had power. His gaze stopped on someone near the back, a thin man, pale, shaking so hard his teeth clicked. The man hadn't spoken once, hadn't pointed, hadn't begged. Bumpy pointed at him. You, he said. The basement erupted in screams as the others realized what that meant. The thin man could barely stand when they cut the ties from his wrists. His legs trembled, as if they didn't belong to him anymore. 3. As if the choice that had just been made had drained the strength from his bones. The others watched in horror as he was pulled to his feet, their faces twisting with rage, jealousy, and pure terror. They screamed his name, cursed him, promised revenge, promised silence, promised anything. None of it mattered. The decision had already passed them by. 3. Bumpy didn't look back at the 14 men as he led the chosen one toward the stairs. He walked beside him. Not behind, not ahead, his presence steady and close. Each step upward felt heavier than the last. The man stumbled twice, catching himself on the wall, breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. The air grew cooler as they climbed, the hum of the generator below fading into a distant growl. At the top, the steel door creaked open. Rain spilled in, cold and relentless, washing over the threshold like it was trying to erase what had happened beneath it. The street outside was empty, soaked in shadows and silence. Harlem slept, unaware of how close the night had come to tearing something open it could never close again. Bumpy stopped just before the man could step out. He grabbed the front of the man's coat and pulled him close. Not violently, but firmly enough that there was no mistaking the seriousness of what came next. The man could smell Bumpy's cologne, clean and sharp, completely out of place in this moment. Bumpy leaned in, his voice dropping so low it barely carried above the rain. "You're going to live," he said. "But you're going to earn it." The man nodded frantically, tears cutting clean lines through the dirt on his face. "You're going to tell them," Bumpy continued. "Every word. Every scream. You don't leave anything out." He tightened his grip just slightly. "You tell them Harlem isn't weak. You tell them basements don't forget." The man tried to speak, but nothing came out. He nodded again instead, harder this time. Bumpy released him and stepped back. For a moment, the man just stood there, staring into the rain, as if the street itself might vanish. Then survival took over. He ran, slipped once, caught himself, then ran faster. Shoes slapping against wet pavement, breath tearing out of his chest. He didn't look back. He didn't slow down. He didn't stop until his legs burned and his lungs felt like they might collapse. Bumpy watched him disappear into the darkness. Then he closed the door. Down below, the generator's hum grew louder. The light flickered once. Bumpy checked his watch and reached for the switch. 3 days later, the butcher shop on Lenox Avenue stood empty, its doors hanging open just enough to let dust and rain drift inside. No police tape wrapped the building. No crowds gathered. No sirens ever came. People passed by without slowing. 3. Instinctively understanding that some places were better left unquestioned. The basement was silent, scrubbed of noise, scrubbed of memory, as if whatever had happened there had been swallowed whole by the concrete itself. No bodies were found. No reports were filed. Nothing existed on paper. But Harlem felt the difference. The fires stopped. The late-night footsteps vanished. No more crosses scratched into brick. No more whispers of meetings behind locked doors. The fear that had crept through the neighborhood retreated just as quietly as it had arrived. 3. Leaving behind something heavier, respect. Not the kind that came from speeches or headlines. 3. But the kind earned when people knew someone was watching and willing to act. The man who ran never stopped running. He crossed state lines with shaking hands and sleepless eyes, telling his story in broken pieces wherever anyone would listen. In back rooms and cheap bars, in places where hate once felt safe, he spoke about a basement in Harlem, about a swinging light. 3. About silence so heavy it crushed the lungs, about a man who didn't shout or rush or threaten, who simply decided. Some laughed him off, said he was drunk, said he was exaggerating. But the laughter never lasted long. Because wherever the story reached, meetings were canceled. Names were erased from lists. Doors that had once been open quietly closed for good. Bumpy Johnson never said a word about it. He didn't claim credit. He didn't warn anyone publicly. He walked the streets the same way he always had, hat low, pace steady, eyes forward. 3. But people noticed something different in the way others moved around him. The way conversations stopped when he passed. The way men who once held their chins high suddenly found reasons to look elsewhere. Years later, when Bumpy was gone, the story still survived. It changed shapes, changed numbers, changed details. But the core never did. 15 went down. 1 came back. Harlem stood. Old men told it in whispers on stoops. Mothers passed it on as warnings. Not about violence, but about limits. 3. About lines that didn't exist on maps, but were understood by everyone who mattered. Because some power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need headlines. It doesn't need proof. It lives in what stops happening. So ask yourself this. If you were standing in that basement, hearing chains scrape and the light swing, and Bumpy Johnson reached for the switch, what if he had pulled the trigger? Leave your answer in the comments. Like the video if this story stayed with you. Subscribe for more untold gangster legends. Some stories don't end, they wait.